Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a place that's honestly as fascinating as it is mysterious, North Korea. It's a country where information, well, it rarely leaves freely. So you might be wondering, how do we actually know what's happening inside? Well, we rely on this massive, complex patchwork of satellite images, intelligence, and diplomatic reports. Let's piece that puzzle together. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the central paradox of North Korea. How does one of the world's most isolated states command such massive global attention? The answer? Sheer strategic influence. Despite its small size and, deep isolation, this country possesses military power and nuclear capabilities that literally force the entire world to pay attention. Every single missile launch, every highly choreographed military parade, every political statement, it's all intensely monitored. Because the reality is, the Korean Peninsula remains one of the most sensitive, high-stakes security regions on Earth. To really grasp this complex geopolitical puzzle step by step, here's our roadmap for today. First, the isolated global powerhouse. Then, origins of the divide. After that, the nuclear deterrent strategy. Then we'll cover economy, sanctions, and cyber. Next up, the geopolitical web. And finally, 3 future scenarios. Let's jump right into Section 1, the isolated global powerhouse. The sheer scale of centralized control here is, quite frankly, staggering. The government dictates almost every single aspect of public life, communication, and media. To put that into perspective, ordinary citizens don't even have access to the global internet. Instead, they use a heavily restricted, state-monitored intranet called Kwangmail. And at the very center of this highly centralized system stands Kim Jong Un. Under his leadership, the state has made a very clear, calculated choice, a massive prioritization of military development, strategic deterrence, and political control over open global integration. This tight central authority is absolutely crucial for them to maintain power and project unyielding strength. Moving on to Section 2, Origins of the Divide. Let's move to and see how this builds. Because to understand why the state operates with such strict defense mechanisms today, we really have to look back to 1945. At the end of World War II, the Korean Peninsula was divided into North and South, which sparked 2 entirely different economic and political systems. Now, this friction eventually exploded into the devastating Korean War in the early 1950s, a conflict that just ripped the peninsula apart. But here's the most crucial historical detail. The war never actually ended with a permanent peace treaty. Actually, scratch that. It's more like it just paused. Today, North and South Korea technically remain under an armistice agreement. This lack of a permanent peace resolution is the exact foundation of the unresolved conflict shaping regional security right this very second. Now for Section 3, the nuclear deterrence strategy. Over the past couple of decades, multiple missile tests have triggered massive global reactions. We're talking everything from UN sanctions to intense military pressure. But to really understand the diplomatic gridlock here, we have to look at 2 fundamentally opposing viewpoints. On one hand, North Korea argues that its weapons programs are an absolute necessity for national defense, for survival, and for resisting foreign pressure. They essentially frame military strength as their one and only shield against external threats. On the flip side, the international community views this nuclear expansion as a severe risk that exponentially increases regional instability. This deep, fundamental disagreement, that's exactly why long-term diplomatic negotiations so frequently just stall out. So, the crucial point is this: uncertainty itself is a major strategic threat. Because North Korea is so isolated, verifying the exact extent of its military capabilities is incredibly difficult. It's like a giant puzzle with missing pieces. This severe lack of transparency means that governments and intelligence agencies worldwide are forced to constantly prepare for the absolute worst-case possibilities. When you're operating in a limited information environment like this, every single missile test and every military parade turns into a major clue that has to be analyzed to predict what they might do next. That brings us to Section 4, Economy, Sanctions, and Cyber. Now, the economic realities on the ground present a really stark contrast to those advanced missile capabilities we were just talking about. Because of its nuclear program, heavy UN sanctions severely restrict North Korea's trade and financial access. Everyday citizens are dealing with serious agricultural and energy shortages, right alongside well-documented humanitarian challenges regarding food security. Yet, despite this severe domestic hardship, the state relentlessly funnels massive resources into prioritizing strategic sectors like military tech. So how do they navigate these crippling economic restrictions? Well, the regime has reportedly turned to a new invisible battleground: cyberspace. Global cybersecurity experts and various governments frequently accuse North Korean-linked groups of orchestrating massive digital heists. They reportedly target international financial systems and cryptocurrency platforms to covertly fund the state. Now, it's worth noting North Korea officially denies these accusations, but these massive cyber operations remain a critical concern globally. It really highlights how this secretive state exerts immense financial influence far, far beyond its physical borders. Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, the geopolitical web. The Korean Peninsula is completely surrounded by major global players, and each one is trying to find stability in very different ways. Take China, for example. They're North Korea's most significant economic and diplomatic partner. China values regional stability above all else, mostly because a sudden crisis could create massive humanitarian and security concerns right on their border, so they heavily oppose any sudden escalation. Then you have South Korea, sitting right next door, facing the incredibly difficult task of balancing high military preparedness with extreme diplomatic caution. And finally, the USA maintains a heavy focus on deterrence and regional alliances, all while trying to somehow keep diplomatic channels open. Honestly, it's a highly delicate balancing act for everyone involved. But balancing that act, it often gives way to a dangerous escalation cycle. Here's exactly how it works. The US, South Korea, and Japan frequently conduct regional military drills to ensure their own security coordination, but North Korea views these exercises as deeply hostile, so they respond with immediate missile launches and intense international warnings. This reactionary cycle of military posturing frequently freezes any ongoing diplomatic progress, keeping tensions in the region incredibly high. Now, if you're wondering why this matters to you directly, just consider the stakes for a moment. The Korean Peninsula sits squarely inside one of the world's most economically critical regions. South Korea, Japan, China, and nearby economies, they're the absolute engine of global technology production, manufacturing, and international shipping networks. A sudden conflict wouldn't just impact Asia, it would instantly send shockwaves through the global economy, directly affecting the tech, the markets, and the supply chains that we all rely on every single day. Which leads us to our final section, Section 6, 3 future scenarios. So where is all of this heading? And this brilliantly illustrates the 3 distinct paths that intelligence analysts generally prepare for. Scenario 1 is continued controlled tension. This is where North Korea continues its military development but avoids direct, large-scale conflict. A lot of analysts believe this is the most likely short-term path. Scenario 2 is renewed diplomacy. If conditions improve, we might actually see limited agreements on sanctions relief or security measures, though a comprehensive long-term deal is, extremely difficult. And then there's Scenario 3, sudden escalation. A major crisis triggered by a military incident or political miscalculation. That's the biggest fear for sure, because in this region, tensions can rise incredibly fast. Ultimately, North Korea is far more than just an isolated state. It's a complex web of military power, political isolation, and deep geopolitical tension. Decades of international attention have been poured into understanding it, yet so much of it remains shrouded in secrecy. Going forward, satellite images will continue to be analyzed and diplomatic channels will keep operating quietly behind the scenes. But as intelligence agencies around the world watch these developments incredibly closely, it leaves us with one critical, lingering question. How long can this delicate balance of power actually hold? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.